I had been rolling around all morning with my new kayak, listening to some old reggae. It was taking me back to the tropics. I think I was subconsciously trying to transplant the feeling of surfing into this southern equivalent, which was obviously antithetical to the quest that I was on, the quest for the heart of the South. I was sitting in the parking lot, dreaming of waves, bad island girls, when the boys finally showed up. After mentioning the kayaking excursion, Jonathan immediately started trying to pawn off his old kayak for a set of new clubs from the blokes. He knew that we were in the golf industry, and he was trying to leverage his charisma. This poor bastard was stuck in the 80s. His clubs were shinier than a new pistol, but they were thinner than a Japanese folded metal blade. He then went on to show me his hands, which I'm not sure if it was a sympathy grab out of sheer desperation, but they were stuck in a 90-degree angle. I told him I'm not sure we had clubs that would work with his hands, but that we would run the idea through the industry. They came out swinging and they thought they had me buried, but luckily I had just swapped out for a new amulet around my neck, and my golf game was unparalleled. It turned out to be a fair shake. I didn't check the score out of respect for their pride, but it was a game I would have happily put money on. The point of the matter was it was far later than anticipated before we got on the water. It was one of those days where you run into multiple individuals named John, the days where you can just feel the chaos of the universe inviting you in. He met us with an eager smile, like someone who was just tall enough to ride a roller coaster for the first time. Dane and I pulled up to his house with our yaks in tow. We strapped his child-sized white water raft on the back. I did not like the look of that thing. It had a somewhat hazardous appearance. After a brief stop in the Circle K to grab a 24-pack of Twisted Teas, we were on our way. After serious debate, we decided to drop John off at the top of the run to watch. The kayaks, Southerners are nice folks, but there's always a stray in the lot. We were getting down that either one way or another, with kayaks would be preferable. Me and the Blokadane made our way across the highway, sliding past unsuspecting locals to drop a car, looking like we were headed to war. About 5 minutes out, we got stopped in a soccer field parking lot. It was just that time of year. I yelled out the window at him. I told him we were losing daylight and that the heart of the South only presents itself occasionally. We had to seize the opportunity. He gave me a sideways look, but he understood the rush. I yelled at him to dodge the corner out of the lot. The kids were on the other side of the field, debating an out-of-bounds call or something. They would be unaffected. He gave me the approving nod, and we both flew across the corner of the field, avoiding the backup. Luckily, we had ditched the trailer with John, so we were sailing easy. We were on our merry way back to meet John, listening to some very intimate R&B. It was the summer of rejection and redemption, after all, when I realized I had forgotten my paddles. Dane immediately flipped a U-turn and started the song over again. This man had a serious problem with getting stuck on vibes. On our way back, John had seemingly gotten a psychic impulse and called us and asked if I got my paddle. We told him we had actually forgotten it, but we had already grabbed it. I could tell in his voice. He was a bit nervous to get in the water, but it was an excited nervous, the kind where you are ready to get the thing over with. I snuck a few hits off of my 50-50 THC CBD cart to further sink into the music. I had to try to temper Dane's impulses. He had decided to become an electrician, and they were not too crazy about their employees handling the kinds of electrical currents that they do while high as a kite. Although that might be how Benjamin Franklin got the bright idea to send that kite up, it was risky business. By the time we got back, I had the song memorized. We got out of the car, wiping away a stray tear or two. We were walking down to the water, sipping our Twisted Teas, pulling our kayaks like a few dead bodies. As we were walking down to meet John, this rustled-looking man with a beard confronted us. He started talking about how he and his wife were thrown out of their boats by vicus fallen trees, round about the underpass under Highway 75. We picked his brain a bit to see if he was serious. We were left with a mixed feeling. He was either bending the truth, or this was a stark warning. Either way, we took it as a challenge. I told him I would torpedo under the trees like I'm in the Olympics. He giggled uncomfortably. I heard him mumbling, laughing to his wife, trying to foretell our doom. Unfortunately, I didn't have time for that. We were in the water. The heart of the South was beating somewhere in the distance, maybe from right past those fallen trees. We tried to find our sea legs. Dane seemed well acquainted with the mild currents. Took me a minute to figure out which direction we were going. John almost fell over right as he got in. This was the first time he had been in a kayak, and it didn't help that he was in a white water bomber. He looked like he was riding in a lost traffic pylon that found itself in the creek. As we progressed downstream, we almost began to look like we weren't actually on an aquatic suicide mission. As we began to paddle, I felt it was a good time to bring up the quest at hand, the heart of the South. I started questioning John a bit. He gave me a dry look, thought for a moment, then started explaining to me how all the fast food operations were actually just fronts for meth operations, how the whole design of the buildings was to thwart cops from seeing handoffs. I shuddered. I moved on to pick Dane's brain next, but I was just met with a stare, and then he finally had to ask, "What do you mean?" I realized we were simultaneously existing in other realities. I thought we all got the download. I had been somewhat disconnected from the South, living in Vegas. So coming back and trying to understand the place was like a sledgehammer to the temple. Ever since impact, things were moving at a crawl, and I was trying to figure how these people could get by. There had to be more fueling them than Bucky's BBQ brisket sandwiches and Lil Smokey's moonshine. Not that I was opposed to such things. I was enjoying the slow life of plenty. I felt great getting away from the smog and the dusty hustlers that crowded the Las Vegas streets. But the more I settled into the South, the more this strange pull towards a life of good times, rock and roll and dreadful mediocrity ensued. That's why I needed to find the heart of the South, so that maybe I could reorient myself around a hidden light. I wanted to be set right under the stars. Maybe some of these folks had lost the rhythm to the old song. I wanted to find the melody, and that's why I was on this God-forsaken kayak. I guessed they just missed the memo. At any rate, I was going to find it, and they were going to understand where I was coming from. We saw an island that was the perfect reloading station. We pulled in. After getting onto dry ground, John pulled out a roach. I looked at Dane to watch his trepidation. He looked at me and said, "You're going to need to hit the hell out of that. I need to live vicariously through you." This was actually a better remark than I expected, and I knew what I had to do. Typically, he would have already smoked that thing in one go and would have started rolling another. Things were different now. John took a pull and handed me the magic. I took a larger-than-normal puff. I figured we were on the water and no rules applied here. Plus, I had to be thinking along strange lines if I were to be able to identify the heartbeat of the South. If that meant I had to accept paranoia that there were cheaters hidden just above the river embankments, so be it. Next we each downed another twisted tea. It was just too easy. Damn things should have been outlawed. Legalize the old-school moonshine and criminalize these abominations. This stuff went down like Arizona and brought back nostalgic childhood memories all in one fell swoop. It was viciously dangerous. We quickly realized that time was unceasingly moving at unprecedented speeds. We got back in our water carriages. Dane slid down the embankment like he was skiing, bringing along a heaping scoop of mud into the kayak, just part of the territory. We were back on the water. As we progressed further, I began to feel as if I was in apocalypse now, drifting down the waters with my squad. I began to scan the banks for enemies. I didn't see them, but I could have sworn I felt their auras. We took a corner, and I sensed life on the left bank. Nobody had any weapons, and so we figured stealth was our best bet. We drifted with occasional soft paddles. The bank dropped down, and I looked them dead in the eye. A whole fence line of cows, staring at us like we were the Beatles touring in the USA for the first time. They began to applaud. "All clear, boys!" I yelled at my comrades. Situation diverted. As we got down further, we were accepting the sudden escape of light particles from our surroundings. We would work with what we were given. We all started to hear 75, the menacing road rage, the 18-wheelers as they battled to stay on the roads. Being that, you could drive the fucker clear from Ohio to Florida. This section of the interstate was a bottleneck north and south, larger than most any this side of the Mississippi. People were accustomed to it here, which meant they took risks. The truck drivers, used to the mayhem, trusted the locals and usually resorted to swiping through Tinder or checking Instagram. It was a battleground and we were headed right underneath it. But we weren't thinking about that. We all had our eyes on the mission at hand. the vicus fallen trees. They began to creep into view, slowly and then all at once. I started slowing my pace, Dane tracking behind. I could see that the speed quickened underneath the trees. They fell in a way that you either had to hit a quick left to right, or hit it horizontally with a lot of speed. I knew if I overthought this, I would be in the water, afraid, exposed, wet. So I turned my brain off, I picked up my speed, and flew, right at the bastards. Right as I got to the pocket, I ducked into my yak, torpedoing majestically through the fallen woods, just as I had envisioned. If I could have had a Jackie Chan-esque replay for the world to see, they would all know how much of a sexy bastard I was. Unfortunately, I couldn't revel long in my austere performance. I had to check on the boys in the back. If one of us went down, we all were going down. I looked back and saw Dane hit the same move. His kayak was much bigger, but he hit it and busted down. We both move our gaze back. There he was, John the pylon surfer. He petered his approach as he came up to the obstacle. Dane and I's faces went white. I started to understand my apprehension to that obtuse-looking kayak. It was not so much a hazard as it was that whoever rode in it could not shake off the hesitation, the knowledge that at any moment that thing could easily throw you in that dirty Chattanooga water. Would that be John's independent doom? Who was going to save the twisted T's? There was no way we were getting back without those. John got underneath the limb and slammed hard into the tree horizontal of the river. "Paddle, paddle, John!" Dane yelled. I just started awestruck, trying to wipe the image of him falling in the water. Canes floating out in a circular explosion. It felt like an eternity passed. I saw him teeter hard to one side, hard to the other, and then slowly he balanced out. And then he was next to us. We holla'd and gave high fives. As we started to get our bearings again, and the lacking severity of that situation began to be processed, we opened up. I explained that my excitement toward this unknown foe had been drastically exaggerated. I had very much wanted a worthy opponent. Yeah, they were full of shit. Dane quickly remarked about the rustled individual and his wife. John was still shaken, but he had a smile, as wide as his face was long. "This bastard wants to tip over when I'm just sitting here," is all he had to say. The man had basically been to Afghanistan, and back in that instance, we couldn't say anything. We got underneath the bridge and the world grew quiet. All I could see was the quickly depreciating youthful fever in the lad's auras. "Pull up, gentlemen. We are an impenetrable wall," Dane said. We all slid in next to each other. At this point we were about as drunk and stoned as you could get, but we all knew inside it was just the beginning. I was halfway glancing at the dark interior of the underside of the bridge. I was looking for stranglers' meth heads that were finally getting that deep slumber after 3-day benders. You hoped that they were asleep, because if they were well rested, this would be the perfect spot to pirate us off of our yaks. Leaving us only with a bridge and a half-used stash, they might just steal our lives, float down with our IDs, swap places with us. Nobody would know anything happened. I let the impulse go. You guys know what happens now. We celebrate our victory here, and we prepare for what's ahead. We each slammed a twisted tea. "I feel alive. Let's go straight to the Ocoee after this," John remarked. "That was an impeccable performance, John. You're ready for anything now, and anything might be coming," I exclaimed. As we got a bit further down the river, I started putting the pieces together. Something about the combination of the modern river and cruising ancient river gave me a window into the framework of these water-ridden southern cities. It's a hidden universe, but it is how everything was settled. They bring commerce in and out all over the country. Like a flock of birds trying to feed on the water, all life is positioned around water. That's where the action is. That's where you find life, especially in this area. There's a large presence of weirdo, hippie rock climbers, but the real magic is happening on the water. There's a whole class system in these waters. The little kayakers such as ourselves, to the jet skis, the wakeboard boats, all the way up to the 3-story fishing party boats, the equivalent of a Bentley or a Rolls-Royce on the water. They served no purpose other than signalling to all the other highbrows that they had the biggest cock on the water. And here we were, drunk as shit, floating down the river in our kayaks. I had a strange impulse to climb this southern ladder and find the man at the top, maybe get him into a high-stakes card game, maybe play the part, maybe rip his heart out. How could I have not seen it before? If the heart of the south was the lakes, we were in the bloodstream just a little bit further now. We were finally getting somewhere. As we got further down the river, we started to hear a thundering roar in the distance to the right. I wondered if this was some sort of atomic testing site. I had heard the stories about the uranium enrichment sites in these surrounding areas. Hell, maybe a forgotten secret weapon at the Manhattan Project in Oak Ridge finally decided to blow. I had a quick associated dreadful notion that the TVA nuclear reactor on the Chattanooga River might have gone up in flames. Was it possible that toxic waste was billowing downstream towards our very location? I was not sure if there was an outlet that would certainly throw a monkey wrench in this whole operation. At any rate, it was getting dark, so we wouldn't know. Best not to worry. John quickly interrupted my dreadful thought stream, explaining how it was the local drag strip, the place where the crazies went to blow off steam, the people that took passion in building vehicles that could blast them along the surface of the earth at suicidal speeds like ground-based kamikazes. These people were numb. Watching cowboys get their backs broken at the local rodeos was not enough for these people. Without words, we pulled up to the shore and began getting out. After a cumbersome scratch fight with a plethora of thorn bushes, we scrambled out onto the drag field. We were just about at the end of the strip. John lit up a couple stogies, passed them around, and we began to survey the scene. It sounded like an insurrection camp in Libya before we got there. But right as we started waiting for the action, it turned into a ceasefire. We were trying to see if anyone had eyes on us. Did we pose a safety risk to these lunatics? I figured they would just take us as target practice. They would enjoy driving their noses straight into our abdomens. Then all of a sudden we heard them rip, one after the next. We cheered them on. We gave them the crowd that they desperately needed. One after the next we threw thumbs up, threw twisted T's into the air. We even flipped one of them off. He returned the gesture, eating it up, we assumed. As the roar crept to a standstill, we noted that the round must be over. We all stared off into the distance, trying to think of how else we could get them going. After a long stillness, John broke the silence. These people live for theatrics, right? If they could have flames coming off the exhaust or guns firing aimlessly ahead like Mad Max, they would make it happen. We are going to give them the pop they deeply desire. The kind of effects that the Racing Association does not allow. But yes, we will give it to them. We will let them feel alive, at least for a moment. Dane questioned this, and then raised his twisted T to his lips, briefly pausing. He made eye contact with John. "Exactly," John exclaimed. I immediately started unpacking twisted T's left and right. I handed them to Dane. Dane handed them to John, who eagerly dashed to the strip, placing them on the closest lane of the strip. I believe that they assumed we were just running around hyping ourselves up to cheerlead the next round of ground-based kamikazes. Either that, or it was just too dark to see us anymore. John continued to assemble the masterpiece, his greatest work yet, a 3-foot-tall pyramid of twisted T's, glistening austerely as magnificent as the Great Pyramid of Giza. "John, as much as I want one more beer, I'm not willing to sacrifice this Mona Lisa." We all accepted the sacrifice we had made. It would be a sober ride in the dark now that we had given up our precious time. We stepped back and waited. The minutes passed like hours, and then we heard it coming. It was time. Holding our intense anticipation, the vehicles seemed to move in slow motion. And then it happened. The car nearest us held a sizable lead. It must have seen the pyramid easily. It didn't slow down. "You were right. He's coming for glory," Dane said. He slammed right into it, full speed. Twisted T's flew up in the air in every direction. The sheer volume of tea exuding everywhere was fantastic. It was even more glorious than expected. Then everything changed. The car unfortunately seemed to be blinded by the twisted rainstorm. He slammed on the brakes. In doing so, either by panicking and turning the steering wheel slightly or simply sliding on the brakes, he began to creep into the other lane. The other driver seemed to be taking this as his chance for victory. He wasn't wavering an inch, and that's when fate took a devilish left hook at destiny. He clipped the driver's front end, and they both whipped intensely in opposite directions. The man who hit the tower of Tiaza was spinning out of control towards the river. The other driver was teetering on 2 wheels, holding on to the last of his hope. It was all he could do to try to salvage this situation, but it meant he could not really slow down. He slowly came down, but it was too late. He shot out way out in the field, wheels shooting off in all directions, the whole front end splitting in half, hopefully before his crotch. So much for that investment. If he had doubts about all the comments people made about his little hobby, at that moment I'm sure he had no ammunition for argument. We all began dashing towards the river. "What the fuck? That was brilliant," I yelled. "Exactly so, my good lad. They ate it up. I could hear them screaming from the stands," Dane responded. "We gave them the perfect nightcap to their brutally flaccid summer, a gift few could provide," John added. In a quick blaze, we were back in our yaks, moving at 3 times the speed of the rest of the journey down the river, and just like that, the image of the South began to cement in my mind. These people were descendants of outlaws. Sure, there was an ever-prevailing robe of racism and an absurd religious impulse, but it was all good intention. These folks wanted to get as close to the action as anyone. The true breed of them were just looking for a thrill. As a fellow adrenaline junkie and absurdity enthusiast, I instantly grew a certain affinity for that breed of Southerner. Instantly the whole idea of Southern folk transformed right before my eyes. I saw through the thin veil in which blanketed my vision. I saw into the innermost sanctum of the soul inside the heart of the South. I felt the heart beating in my chest. I felt it beating around me. They wanted to push the pedal as far to the floor as possible without witnessing what we just had. Although deep in their hearts, they desired that as well. That's why I was at peace with the situation. As long as nobody died, they were all about it. Lucky for the 2 individuals tonight, I think that would be just the case. Maybe a few stitches, a few casts, but a whole lot of stories. It would be fodder for the next generation of porch sitters and twisted tea drinkers, something in which their kids would remember and try to one-up. We gave them the deep magic, the melody to the old song, the one lined with bullets flying at high noon, the slow honky-tonk of danger, the long nights under the stars, with contraband in their stow-bags. We gave them a taste of their past, and hopefully we did a favor for the whole corpus of Southern sweethearts. It was just one small step, but that song would be sung again, and we ushered it 1 note closer.